So recently I had a comment on my YouTube channel saying I was a shill for Shure microphones. Now in this digital world, we have this funny thing where we see people all the time on YouTube and we can make assumptions about them and where they come from. And we can see all of this gear that they have and think, oh, they must have just been given it, or they must be rich, or they must be some kind of trust fund maybe, or whatever, or even a shill for a company. And I've seen other YouTubers talking about this recently too, like Colt Caparoon, where people sometimes question how people are acquiring the gear that they have. Because a lot of this gear is quite expensive, especially once you add all of the pieces up, especially things like consoles and acoustic treatment and microphones and preamps and EQs. If I added up all the gear I have in this studio, it'd be worth a surprising amount of money. But when I got this comment, I thought, well, maybe this is a good opportunity to explain how someone like me acquired all of the gear that I have. Because you might be surprised, I'm definitely not a shill for Shure microphones. Honestly, I wish I was a shill for Shure microphones. Maybe I'd have even more gear. But yeah, let's dive into it and let's have a discussion of how I got the gear that I have. So I've talked recently about how I acquired this console and some of the other gear that I've built on this channel, but I actually started acquiring studio equipment long before I even had a YouTube channel. Back around 2008, I was working as a live engineer and starting to look at how to get into studio recording. The bulk of my time was just playing in bands, doing like acoustic duo work and corporate work like that, doing live sound and teaching guitar. And just being around music, eventually I think you end up in a point where either you get asked by artists, do you do recordings? Or you start thinking maybe you should be getting into that space. So I started buying my first sort of mid-tier home studio focused interfaces, and I bought a couple of microphones and started expanding the beginnings of my home studio setup. But the way I was able to afford all this gear was that in 2008 there was the financial crisis, and all of my American friends, I know it was a really hard time for you, but what you might not know is that here in Australia at the same time we had some issues financially, but there was a mining boom going on and there were all kinds of crazy things, and our dollar became worth for the first time more than the US dollar. That was compounded with a lot of US companies trying to offload gear that no one was buying, like microphones and such, for way cheaper than usual. So at this time, I was able to purchase things like a good pair of studio monitors, a really decent 8-channel interface, and a bunch of microphones like my Shure drum mic pack and my first studio microphone, maybe a Rode mic, and a couple of other bits and pieces for really affordable prices. So this was kind of like a once in a lifetime opportunity that just happened to come up, and I seized that opportunity to buy my first ever studio pieces of equipment. Now, whilst a financial crisis isn't going to come by very often, and people aren't going to be lucky enough to always purchase in those circumstances, things do change for people financially over time. And what you should always be keeping an eye out for is for things maybe used, maybe not necessarily new, but used on Marketplace or eBay, because sometimes there are certain countries or people from certain areas or certain circumstances where people will be selling stuff at much more affordable prices. Now, the other main way that I've acquired lots of this gear, as you should know, is by building it myself. I got into DIY to save money. If you can build equipment like acoustic panels, like microphones, like preamps and EQs, you can get really high-end studio equipment for far less money. It costs you in time and your labor, but you save that money and you have a better return on investment because you can later even sell those bits of gear if you want for a profit. And good high-end audio gear always retains its price. Now, do all clones of 1073s retain their value? Probably not, but there are set pieces of gear that you can look into buying that if you need to sell later on will hold their value. But I digress. Building things yourself is a really good way to acquire high-end studio gear for as an affordable price as possible. So if you look at things like my Neve 1073 preamps, my OLA 5 optos, my Cappy gear, all of that equipment I built myself, and except for one of the OLA 5s, all of those were out of my own money. Now the other way you can acquire really cool studio gear is by not following trends or looking for bits of gear that have fallen out of favor with engineers, studios, and the like. Only about a year or so ago, I snapped up a bunch of DBX 160Xs and some other DBX gear because people were selling off their studio equipment and people just seemed to maybe not be into that particular sound at the time. There were so many DBX 160Xs going for around 150, 200 bucks. I wanted to increase the amount of outboard compressors I had and did some research, and these compressors seemed to do a thing that I wanted. So I snapped up a bunch of them for really affordable prices, and then funnily enough, since then, they've gone way up in value and are now worth 3 or 4 times as much. Now I've seen this price fluctuate. Sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up. What you need to do is see the trends that are going on and buy things perhaps at the right time. And you can see this on things like Reverb and eBay. If there's lots of stuff there, maybe that's the time to buy. I don't know, that's entirely up to you. But trying to not buy things when there's lots of hype and buy something when it's more affordable, and being clever about that is an easier way to acquire high-end studio gear at a more affordable price as well. One of the other ways you can acquire high-end studio gear at more affordable prices is looking for when studios are either liquidating or closing down, or when they're doing tax write-offs during tax season. You will often find certain places selling gear for much, much cheaper prices because they're trying to offload that gear or they're writing it off against their tax. So those times of year, like at Christmas or tax time, where people are spending heaps of money on plugins and there's all this hype around plugins and software, maybe you should have a look at what hardware is going for really good discounts as well. There are things like Craigslist and once again, Marketplace on Facebook, where you can find people getting rid of gear for really affordable prices at all different times of the year as well. Another way I've been able to get really high-end, cool pieces of equipment for affordable prices is by buying stuff that is either broken or needing repairs, and having those DIY skills that I've mentioned many times on this channel. I often see pieces of gear like compressors, EQs, preamps that go for sale and are missing components or have malfunctioned or need replacement parts. And if you have a bit of patience and soldering skills and time to do some research, you can buy these broken pieces of equipment for really affordable prices and then repair them for very little money and have high-end studio gear in your studio. Now I know for some of you that might be a really far-fetched one, but it's how I've gotten some of my pieces. Things like the DBX 166 studio compressor. I have a video on that real soon. I got that for $35. That's right, $35 for a studio quality compressor, and all it needed was a switch replaced. And that only cost me maybe $5 or something. I also recently came across an SSL bus compressor at a ridiculous price that I'm going to talk about in another video, but I got that for an incredible price. That's a bit more complicated how I came across that one, but we'll get to that soon. So if you want to acquire high-end studio gear, get your DIY chops up. Now the final way that I acquired all of the gear I have, and this is one that every studio engineer will tell you, is that I just saved money and worked my ass off. What you've got to remember is this is a long game. You're not going to get all of this gear tomorrow. This has taken me years to build up all of this equipment, years and years. I've bought pieces over many years and slowly but surely built up the amount of equipment I have to where it is now. And now it looks quite impressive, but a few years ago, I didn't have many pieces at all. If I went all the way back to 2008, I had barely any studio gear, and it has taken me from 2008 till now to build up all of the equipment that I have. That's like 16 years of buying gear at the right time, buying gear when they were maybe not trending, or someone was desperate to sell some stuff, or buying pieces of gear that I was going to build or repair myself. It's a long journey, and you've got to be in this for the long game. So just don't expect all this gear all at once. Know that you'll come into it over time, and be patient. That's how I got my gear. And if you talk to my missus, it's because I have a really understanding partner. I love you, Loz. Thanks for putting up with all of my crazy purchases. But seriously, I should also mention the fact, lastly, that I have a very understanding partner that understands my passion for music and knows that if something goes on some kind of crazy price or special, that sometimes I've got to bite the bullet and buy that piece while it's extremely cheap. And if I didn't have her and her support as well, it would probably be a really difficult proposition to buy all of this crazy gear. So thanks, Loz. This one goes out to you. Anyway, that's my journey. That's how I got all this gear. But let me know in the comment sections down below. How do you come across your gear? Is there a way to get gear more affordable that I haven't maybe mentioned yet? Let me know in the comment sections down below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. I'm Mitch from the DIYRecordingstudio.com, and I'll catch you soon.